If just 1% of prisoners in the US were innocent, that means there is over 20,000 innocent people in prison in America.
Jesus.
Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone and welcome back to episode 25 of the Grave Secrets podcast. We're your hosts, I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth. So, today we've got something a little different for you. We have done discussing the evidence episodes in the past.
Yeah.
And they seem to have gone down really well.
Yeah, people have really enjoyed those because I feel like they're just a little bit different from your normal true crime podcast where it's constant cases.
Yeah, and it is really difficult because obviously we work in forensic science and for Think Forensic, so we don't want to give too much away in the episodes, but I think people do find it fascinating because it's not the kind of stuff that you usually hear about.
Yeah.
But today isn't specifically evidence-based,
no,
but it does still intrinsically link to forensic science and true crime.
Yeah.
Because what we're going to be discussing today is the death penalty. So the death penalty and capital punishment.
Yeah.
And this was actually a suggestion that we got for something to cover on the podcast. So I promise you, if you do give us suggestions...
we will do them.
Yeah.
We will cover them.
Well, we might do.
And we've had some really lovely comments recently as well. The one we got on YouTube the other day, I was like, oh my God, I sent it to you straight away.
Yeah.
Someone actually likes our accent and likes listening to the Yorkshire accent.
Crazy. Yeah.
No idea why, but thank you for that. And we have just hit 30,000 views on YouTube. Not to like scare you or anything, because I know when we first hit 10, Beth was like, oh my God, we've got 10,000 views. And I was like, oh, we've got 20. You were like, what? And then now I'm like, 30.
But then when I got, when I saw it earlier, it was funny because I said to Lizzie, my housemate, I was like, oh my God, I was like 30,000. I was like, that is crazy. That's mad. And I said, I love not having anything to do with the stats because I'm always just pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Whereas you've probably seen that we're close for a while.
I did last night. We were 71 views away and I kept refreshing it and refreshing it and refreshing it. I was like, come on, hit 30, hit 30.
You see, that's what I find mad. Like, in such a short space of time, we've had like 70. Do you know what I mean? Like just overnight, basically.
Yeah, it weren't even overnight. It was like a couple of hours because it happened when I went to bed and I got the notification when I woke up this morning. But when I woke up this morning, it said 7 hours ago. So we actually hit it last night.
Madness.
Yeah.
So thank you ever so much, everyone.
So if you do have YouTube and you like watching instead of just listening, obviously we have the episodes out as a podcast. We also do the video versions on YouTube and we do short clips on TikTok and Instagram. So if you make sure you follow us over there and subscribe, it will be very much appreciated because we've got 30,000 views, but we've got 120 subscribers, I think.
Yeah.
So we've not got that many subscribers yet, but hopefully it's coming.
And I think we're going to do some more bloopers, aren't we?
Yeah, we'll do some more funny stuff for you as well. Show more of us.
I mean, we keep saying it, but it is quite intense. So I think we'll put some bloopers in there.
Yeah, I've got something for you as well.
She's doing it again. And
another little present. So if you are listening on the podcast and you can't, you're not watching on the YouTube, we've actually got sent some tumblers from Mioke, and they are my favourite brand for tumblers. I mean, I know everyone goes on about like Stanley, don't they, and having Stanley cups, but I think these are just really fun, and they are the Halloween collection.
I love it.
It's very fitting because we're like spooky all year round.
Yeah, we are.
And I've got this one with skulls all over it.
Do you know what I like about this?
One.
The last one that we got sent had like the big long straw poking out of it. Whereas this, I would say, is a one-up because I can, if that tips over, it won't leak everywhere.
It's completely leak proof. But on the others, if you take the straw out, it closes up inside and makes it leak proof. So you can take the straw out and just put it on your seat.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Learn something new every day. So yeah, Halloween, and I thought this episode is not going to come out anywhere near Halloween, but I've already got my skull cup out, so I thought it's sort of fitting for the podcast.
Oh yeah,
it's
in always
general.
fitting.
This is very fitting. Let me
thanks.
move these away so we're not rustling the whole way through.
Okay, so obviously there is a lot to discuss on this topic. I'm going to call it the death penalty all the way through. That's what I would naturally call it.
Yeah.
It is also referred to as capital punishment. And funnily enough, it was actually initially called judicial homicide.
Right.
That was the phrase that was used. Another thing, in this episode, I'm going to be whacking out all the stats. I'm not usually a stat person.
I'm normally the stat person.
Yeah.
And I've got quite a few stats, but we'll see if we've got the same ones.
But I just found it, I mean, obviously it is just fascinating, but there were so many stats and I realised I'd spent like 2 hours just doing stats.
I was down a rabbit hole. So I started and then you click on something and then I click on something else and then something else and then something. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm deep in stats here.
And I watched quite a lot of Trevor McDonald documentaries, where he's
got some good ones, haven't they?
People on death row as well.
Interviewing them on death row. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
So we're going to give you a bit of the history of capital punishment. But again, another thing that surprised me was the amount of different crimes that can lead to a death penalty conviction.
Yeah, there was one that I'll leave it till we get to the stats, but there were one in particular crime that I thought, oh, the death penalty. Imagine if they had the death penalty over here. There's loads of people in prison for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So according to my list, we've got murder. Makes sense. Assassination, mass murder, child murder, aggravated rape, terrorism, aircraft hijacking. Thought, wow.
Right,
that's
okay.
a lot of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and then crimes against like the state. So overthrowing government, treason, espionage, piracy, sedition, which is, I believe how you pronounce it, which is, again, rebelling against the state. And then in some cases, it's when someone has reoffended in the same way. So it might be a sexual assault offence, but if they've then been prosecuted for it, gone out and committed more of the same kinds of crime, then they'll get charged with capital punishment.
Okay, so the one that I looked at is...
Oh, hang on. Let me just finish my list. There's more.
Oh, there's more on the list?
I know. Aggravated robbery, kidnapping, drug trafficking, drug dealing, and drug possession. So
I was going to say that more than a third of people that were on death row were due to drug offences.
Yeah, and that's what I found mad. Like drug possession. Like, yeah, I know drugs are bad.
Yeah.
However,
death for drugs.
Yeah. Ending someone's life based on. I mean, again,
trafficking's different to possession.
Yeah, and it's all a matter of. Oh, sorry. It's all a matter. I've just apologised to my microphone
again.
Yeah, I've done that before. It's all a matter of like scale, isn't it? So if you are the top rung dealer that is knowingly giving out drugs that are killing people, then. It's kind of it's the life for a life.
Yeah, and it depends on the drugs as well, doesn't it? I know that in America, like their drugs, they've got like more popular street drugs that are different to what we have.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the class as well, doesn't it? You know, sort of class A and class B and whatever they actually are dealing. And like you said, the damage that has come from that dealing.
Yeah. But it was just, I just thought it would basically be Murder.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Murder and probably, when I was looking at these, it took me back to the Gacy case and Dean Corll.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, Gacy got the death penalty.
Yes.
And when you look back at his crimes, absolutely horrific when you go through them. So murder against especially children, young people.
Yeah, just abhorrent.
Multiple murders, serial killers, things like that.
Yeah.
But then there was some of the lesser offences.
That's why I just couldn't believe that there were so many different types. So some of the first kind of references to there being a death penalty was within the Code of King Hamamri of Babylon.
Okay.
I've probably really butchered that and I apologise. But that was kind of it's far back as the 18th century. So it was 1755 BC.
Yeah.
And they'd mentioned within this code basically what were their laws and what would mean that someone could be put to death for. And that was kind of the first time it was referenced. But then again, Plato was referenced as seeing the death penalty as a means of purification. So there has been references through, all of the ages.
I'm guessing back in, like when you said 17...
Yeah, 55.
55, I'm guessing they would sentence people to death as well for a lot less, with a lot less evidence.
Yeah. Because, again, I always think of it as like Robin Hood.
Yeah.
When when someone would steal vegetables or whatever because their family is dying, and then the next thing you see them hanging or their heads on a stake, that kind of thing. That's what, if you think back to capital punishment or the death penalty, that's the kind of thing that I think you think of.
Yeah.
But it was in 1982 that the first lethal injection was used. And since then, there have been 1,414 cases of the lethal injection having been used.
Right.
So that's like still the top.
The main one.
Yeah, the top one. But again, I didn't realise that you can choose how you are going to be executed if you're on death row.
Right, okay, so what are the options?
You've got 5 options. So it's lethal injection.
Yeah.
Electrocution, so electric chair. I know.
Who in the right mind's going to choose?
Yeah. Gas chamber.
Right.
Hanging. And then the firing squad.
Right, okay, I would go lethal injection.
Yeah, see, I've been thinking about this.
Imagine firing squad.
I think I'd probably go firing squad.
Depends how good the shot is. What if...
Right, no, so again, this is another fact.
We bleed to death.
Hitting you with the facts. It's multiple people, obviously, it's a squad, but it's multiple people, and some of them are actually blanks. So some people have blanks in their weapons so that ultimately they don't know who's the one that has killed the person. Right.
Okay, well, I'm not sure on that one, because I just think how far are they away from you? If it was someone shooting me in the head, yeah, because it's instant.
Yeah.
But what if they shoot you in your legs or arms first, and then you...
Yeah.
I know it's not much longer in between, but you're still going to feel the pain more than a lethal injection.
But then don't you think that about the lethal injection? Because they can get that wrong sometimes.
Yeah, they can. There's cases in there where that has gone
and if you're
wrong.
A bit queasy, don't listen. But I was listening to an interview with someone that conducts the lethal injection, and he was saying because people are so scared, their veins kind of tense and contract that much that you can't get a vein to give them it, and then it doesn't go in necessarily all the way, and then sometimes they're not fully unconscious, sometimes they can still feel things.
I suppose there's pros and cons to each one then. I would try and go for the one least painful. Hanging, oh God, I don't know how someone would opt for hanging, because that's...
Well, there's actually only been 3 instances.
Yeah.
But again, that's quite mathematical. They have to weigh the person, they wet the rope beforehand and then stretch it out. Again, it depends on the rope to the size of the person, all of that. So that is quite mathematical.
Yeah.
And if you get that slightly wrong, then it does go horrifically wrong.
Going all the way back to school days when we did things about people getting hung, and I always remember them saying that the families and the loved ones were allowed to go into the bottom, and the kids would swing on the legs of the person hanging.
Yeah, to
and
kill
I
them
used
quicker.
to think, oh my God, that's horrific, but it's actually to kill them quicker, to put more weight on it.
Yeah.
And if you love the person, you'd want them to die quicker and not suffer.
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh, that's horrific.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't it?
Horrendous. Yeah. Have you got any stats? I won't hog the stats.
Lots of stats. So I got mine from Amnesty International, and I didn't actually know that so many countries still have the death penalty.
Yeah.
So I got a little list up, and there's certain countries that have abolished them and some that obviously still have them.
Yeah.
And globally, there was at least 28,282 people were on death row at the end of 2022. So in 2022, there were 883 executions over 20 countries. And China is actually believed to have the highest execution rate. For some reason, in my head, I thought it would be the US.
Yeah, I think because we hear about it a lot more in the US, don't we? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I saw that and I thought they are quite good at keeping
secret.
They're themselves to themselves.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
So we just don't ever hear about it, I guess. But I wonder whether the list of crimes in terms of what they will give a death penalty conviction for are the same.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really see anything on that.
No.
But another thing that shocked me is that China had the most executions, followed by Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and then the USA. So all those places were above for executions.
Yes. But is that surprising?
Not really when you think about it, but when you think of death row, I instantly think of America, and it's because of all the TV shows and things. You instantly go to
I would imagine,
America.
and I could be completely wrong, but I would imagine that there's a lot more people sat for longer lengths of time on death row in America, and potentially the reason that the numbers are higher in the other countries that you've just mentioned is because they aren't really waiting around.
I actually had a look at the stats of how many people were on death row in a specific year and how many people were executed in that year.
Yes.
And it was probably over double the amount that was on there that got executed. So like less than half the people that were on death row were actually executed. The rest of them were just sat on death row for, sort of
years,
20 odd
40,
years. Yeah.
In one of the interviews I watched, 40 years he'd been on death row.
Wow, 40 years is crazy, isn't it?
And he actually had worked in the, what do you call it? Like a salon, but for men, barbers.
The barbers.
He'd worked in the barbers within the prison for 40 years, and he'd got a big cardboard board of loads of photos of him since he'd been in. And he said that the reason he'd put it on cardboard was so that he could then, when he left prison, if he left prison, he'd be able to take it out with him and then look at it and think, I'm never going to do that again. And then they went back to him 5 years later and he was still in, and they were like, do you still think you're going to take your cardboard board home? And he was like, yeah, no, I'm not. He was like, I think he was 82.
Right.
And he was like, I now know that I'm going to die in here.
Yeah, what was his crime?
It was an aggravated, you're making me say it, and I can't say the word.
Burglary. That wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
So aggravated burglary, did he kill someone? What was the...
I think he'd used a gun, but I don't think he'd actually killed anyone, as far as I know.
Right.
But speaking of kind of there being a lull in the amount of people that are actually put to death compared with how many people are on death row, between 1967 and then 1976, there were no executions in America whatsoever.
Yeah.
While there were like legal challenges considering whether or not it was, again, acceptable to put people to death for their crimes. But it actually ended with Gary Gilmore's case.
Right.
And Gary Gilmore had been convicted of robbing and murdering Max Jensen, who was a gas station employee. And he'd basically, again, tried to break in and steal things and then just shot this poor Max Jensen. So he was then put to death in 1977, and that was kind of the return of the death penalty. And that actually was by firing squad.
Right.
He said something like, I live by the gun, I die by the gun, or something like that.
Okay, I can I can sort of...
But that was in Utah State Prison in Salt Lake City. And again, we've covered a case there before.
Yeah, we have. I was actually surprised at how many women were executed in 2022. So the amnesty facts were based, the last ones they'd got the full years for were 2022. That's why it goes back to that. So it was 12 women were executed in Iran and 1 in Saudi Arabia. And I thought, I wonder what they did, because there weren't any information on what the
I know that's the thing with statistics.
Done.
We like the details, but they just give you the facts.
And when I looked at the global stats in general for the death sentence, it was it had sort of risen, but then there was a drop in 2020, but now they've started going back up again. So 2020 was really low. Well, it looked fairly low, and then you could see 2021 was more, 2022 was more.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I wonder what the reason is for that going back up. Is it because we were in lockdown and
Yeah,
not as
so
many
apparently
people were committing?
COVID had a massive impact because they basically put a hold on putting anyone to death. And then pharmaceutical companies were then putting more money into miraculously helping people, rather than using their resource on drugs that were ending people's lives.
Right.
So they had a big backlog of, and there's also been a big backlog of pharmaceutical companies now getting big ethics departments and saying like, oh, actually, do we want to be known as a pharmaceutical company that provides drugs to kill people? Yeah.
Another thing that I found quite shocking, that at least 3 executions, 2 in Iran and 1 in Afghanistan, were public.
Wow, still
public.
Jeez.
So, and it said Iran 2, but Afghanistan 1+. So it said at least 3, but they didn't have the exact numbers. And in Iran, at least 5 people were executed for crimes that they committed when they were under 18.
Gosh.
So here you'd go to juvenile, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And they were executing them.
Again, there are quite a lot of cases on in America where the offenders have been on death row for years. There was one guy that I saw, and he was 15 when he did kill 2 women. Yeah. But he was 15 when he committed the crimes, and so he's gone through like all of the big like his 18th, his 20th, 21st, and then 30, 40, 50, all in just
all on death row as well.
All on death row, yeah.
God.
Going back to the women though, I was looking at, it was the American National Statistics for capital punishment, I think it was, but I'll fact check that one. We'll put all of the
links in if you want to know more and dig a bit deeper onto it.
Yeah. But that was as of March 11th, 2024, there are 52 women on death row in America, and that makes up 2.12% of the death row population.
Right.
So men compared to women on death row is very, very little.
I'd like to know what the women did on death row as well, because I feel like for a judge to give a woman a death row sentence, it must have been something particularly horrific and shocking.
So I thought that, but again, there's something online called the Faces of Death Row, and you can basically hover over their mugshot, and it tells you
what they've done,
what they did, and they
I'll be on that later.
Yeah, and they were like aggravated assault, or a couple of them were murder, but it wasn't like they were
not all of them.
No. And then there's only been 18 women executed since 1976. So in comparison, it's just
a lot more men on death row and getting executed. In the US, actually, 27 states still use the death penalty, but 23 did actually abolish it. And I know we always talk about different laws in different states, and for us from the UK, it is quite hard for us to get our head around how
it's so confusing.
It's different everywhere you go. But you can see now where people do a crime in a different state because their laws are different and they won't get as much. They won't get as extreme punishment for it. I'm guessing that you don't want to do something in a state where there's still the death penalty.
No. And then 6 states are still on a hold of execution. So basically, again, they're having this ethical dilemma as to whether or not they should still be carrying out these executions or not. And I didn't realise how political it all is, which again isn't a surprise.
Yeah.
But it is so political in terms of, so Texas has carried out the most executions.
I expected that.
And they were known as being like the training ground almost for how to carry out the best executions. Yeah. Well, again, so there is a man called Jim Willett, who was a Texas warden. And in 3 years working at the prison, he carried out 89 executions in 3 years.
I wonder if this affected him, because I know the people you're killing have done some horrific crimes.
He's very proud.
Yeah, because they've done some horrific crimes. I feel like it could go one way or the other. It could affect you and think, oh God, I never want to do that. But it could go the other way and think, well, I'm getting rid of all the bad people from the earth, sort of thing.
Yeah, no,
so
I think
that way
I
out.
think his is a very maybe old school American mindset.
Yeah.
Where he talked a lot about the gear that they use, and he talks a lot about how, they're the best to do it.
Did he have any emotion through saying this?
No, and was basically like, I'm good at my job, is how he saw it. Whereas they
think that's scary, because he is basically a killer.
Yeah, 89 people,
which is probably the most in ever, more than the serial killers.
Yeah.
And I know he's killing the bad people. I know you can try and put your morals on it and justify it.
Yeah. No.
But he must be immune to killing.
I found it really unnerving. Yeah.
He must be immune to killing people, which makes me think that you won't want to piss him off in everyday life, would you?
No. Because, again, there was interviews with other wardens, and they'd said that they don't get paid anymore to do it. And, there's no kind of benefit for them.
So they do it because they want to do it?
Pretty much.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think...
No.
I don't think I'd be any good at that job.
No.
Someone's crying there in front of you, I'd be like, don't worry about it. Let's just do it tomorrow.
and again, they were like, oh, and look at our new state-of-the-art facility. And they were like, and we've now put in a separate viewing area for the families and a separate viewing area for the victims' families. And I just thought it was all so strange how proud of it they are.
I sort of get the viewing facilities, because if someone had, say, done something, murdered my family, my parents, my sister, I probably would watch them get executed.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think I can't think that I would want to.
Yeah.
But the only time I can kind of see that I might would be if I was in absolute fear of that person.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the only way or that you're going to believe that they are actually gone is to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
So this is quite morbid, but when my granddad died, I was 16, so I wasn't like young, but we'd never really lost anyone else in the family, and I just could not believe that he wasn't going to be there.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to go and see it.
So you had to see it for yourself to believe it, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I don't know whether if someone else that was killed, like a family member, whether or not I'd want to see it, because then it feels a bit, I don't know, like voyeuristic maybe. Do you know what I mean? Like, they've killed one of my loved ones, but now I'm going to watch them die. Don't know. But I think if I personally was scared of the person, then I would probably need to see it to then feel safe.
To believe it's happened.
To believe it, yeah. But who knows? And again, it's like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, isn't it? It's like, unless you are in that situation, you just have no idea.
Yeah,
how you would react.
Have you got more stats or?
Well, I was going to go into some of, in fact, yes, one more on the facilities used. So obviously we've mentioned the firing line, we've mentioned lethal injection, but for the gas chamber, again, there's only been, I think, another 3 cases where, same as the hanging, where people have chosen the gas chamber.
Yeah.
But actually they try and defer people from that, because to get one seal that protects the gas chamber so that obviously the chemicals don't link, that costs $25,000. So
Right, but it's better to be safe than sorry, because you don't want the gas leaking
well,
out.
yeah,
so,
absolutely, but it's expensive for them,
yeah.
so they don't really want to be doing it
Yeah.
very often. But no, I think, well, I was going to talk about the race of defendants that get executed, and I know you've got quite a bit on this as well.
Yeah, I've got a bit on that. But if you want to go in with yours, I think mine was a little bit further down in my actual case.
So there is some research that was conducted in 2014 by a university professor in Washington, Professor Kay Beckett, and they found that jurors in Washington state are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant.
And in Washington, were the juries white?
Than a white defendant in a similar case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found a lot out about when I was looking through, I had a look through the Innocence Project and the people that were on death row. And the numbers were quite shocking how many people on death row were black men.
Yes. Although, again, to kind of balance it, because again, we've got to balance it, on this, which is the stats from the reference that I talked about earlier, the national statistics of death, like that's a thing. It's mad. But the rate of defendants executed are 55.7% white, so that equals 889 white people. The percentage of black defendants executed were 33.9, so that's 541 people.
Yep.
And then Latino Americans was 8.4, so 134 people.
Yep.
And then 31 other.
I'd love to know, within you'd have to break this down and really, really break it down into areas, sections, states and everything.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know what percentage of the population that was. So in a certain area, what percentage of that area is white, what
Predominantly,
is black, what is Latino, and then compare it to those stats, because I'd still say that there was, as a percentage, there was more black people that were
on death
executed and on death row in terms of, obviously that is, 55, what was it, 50 something percent were?
Yeah, 55.7.
But in terms of the community and how many...
Yeah, white people in comparison to black people we have. Yeah.
I bet that percentage would take it to a different outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
In general.
And generally, people are expected to stay on death row for up to a decade. So they're, like you say, it doesn't give you any of that context.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing before kind of you get into your case, I wanted to know how many people in America in general actually agree with the death penalty.
Yeah.
Because obviously I've mentioned it gets quite political. So from state to state, different people in power are fighting to have the death penalty and vice versa. But in 2021, a study showed that 60% of US adults favour the death penalty.
Okay.
But that is specifically for people convicted of murder. So they'd asked them in relation to people that had committed murder.
Yeah.
And 60% said that they strongly favour it. No, sorry. I'm getting confused. 60% said they favour it.
Yeah.
27% strongly favour it.
Right.
So there's only 27% that strongly favour it. But then in terms of actually opposing it, about 4 in 10. So 39% actually oppose it. And only 15% strongly opposed.
Right.
So that is a really low
for strongly
percentage
disagreeing with
to
something.
strongly disagree. And that's according to the Pew Research Centre that did a study about that.
I think this subject it's sort of a hard one because you can see people's different opinions, people's different point of views, and in general with the death penalty, like I said, when we look at people like Dean Corll and John Wayne Gacy, it's absolutely horrific. And some people that I spoke to, I asked a few people around me and said, you know, like, what do you think about the death penalty? Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? And the most thing that people had in common was it is sort of the easy way out.
Yes.
So they're killing them and they're not spending the rest of their life in prison. But then if you spent 40 years on death row anyway, you've sort of spent 40 years suffering, but they didn't think it was long enough. So the reason that people that I spoke to didn't want the death penalty was because they thought the person should suffer more.
Yeah. And that is kind of backed up because, again, in another interview with someone that was on death row, he'd been on death row for more than half of his sentence and then was deemed mentally unfit to be on death row.
Yeah.
So was then moved to general population. And again, when interviewed, he said he wishes he was back on death row because now he's got a longer sentence.
Yeah.
And so you think, that's not, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't like that, but...
And I think with certain crimes, like the really horrific ones, I can see why people agree with death row.
Yeah.
But then for the lesser ones, I don't. And then you seem to think, like, in my head, I thought, well, if someone's on death row now, it'll probably be, you know, we've got all this advances in technology, advances in DNA. Surely if you put someone on death row, there is no doubt whatsoever.
Yes.
But then you start reading into cases, and my case is a very, very recent one that I've been looking at through the Innocence Project.
Yeah.
And it made me question, should he be there at all?
I know.
And you think we are now in 2024 with all these massive advances in forensics and you still are unsure.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's easier, I think, for people like us in the UK that don't have the death penalty to say that potentially, yes, it's a good thing in certain situations.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, if we had it here in the UK and you heard about people that were being put to death,
that you knew that
I think it wouldn't sit well with us at all.
More shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it would be potentially, if I were to agree with it at all, it would have to be multiple loss of life.
Yeah, very serious, very horrific.
Yeah, and it would have to be all of the evidence, the forensic evidence that was proved to be, true and legitimate and valid.
Yeah.
Before you even would consider to put to sentence.
For me,
it'd
have to be solid DNA evidence that puts them at the crime scene, at the time of injury, on the murder weapon, everything.
Yeah, I know.
And it'd have to be DNA.
And I just don't think that would ever be, especially in the UK, I don't think that they'd ever be confident enough in the technology that we would feel comfortable giving that as a sentence. Yeah.
So I am going to talk very, very quickly about the Innocence Project and just whiz through a few facts, because the case that I want to look at today is one that I found through the Innocence Project. So they've helped more than 250 innocent people get out of prison. And this was actually quite shocking. So there's various studies that have been done, and they estimated that between 2.3 and 5% of US prisoners are innocent.
Okay.
That seems like a quite small number, but if you put it into perspective, if just 1% of prisoners in the US were innocent, that means there is over 20,000 innocent people in prison in America.
Jesus.
Now that fact in itself, I was like...
horrific.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the vast majority exonerated from death row by the Innocence Project have been black males. So out of 191, 103 of them were black males that were wrongly convicted.
Yeah.
And that leads me on to my case, which I was reading through this and I actually got chills. I found this quite shocking, and I know that we've done lots of cases. We cover some horrific things on the podcast, and this one, I just thought, how is it possible?
I know,
and that is quite worrying when I'm just saying like, oh yeah, the advances in forensics, the advances in this, the advances in that. It takes more than the advances in forensics to get someone off death row.
And what's really upsetting about it is that you found this case, I've got a case, and they're just two of, like you say, probably thousands and thousands of other cases that are just as unbelievable.
Exactly. I want to talk about the case of Marcellus Williams, and I picked this one because at the moment he is all over the US news. So it's very prominent in the news at the moment. So he is actually scheduled for execution on the 24th of September. This episode will air on the 23rd of September, so we don't actually know the outcome of this just yet. But I thought to look into this case, have a look what he was convicted of, have a look at the evidence, have a look at the advances, and see how it's actually got to this point. So he's actually been on death row for 24 years. And in 1998, Felicia Gale died, and she'd been stabbed 43 times in her own home. So it was quite a frenzied, horrific attack. I think it was her husband or a partner came home and found her. So absolutely awful scene. And in 2000, Marcellus Williams was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery, burglary, but despite there being no physical evidence that connected him to the scene of the crime. Okay?
Okay.
So bear with me here, because his conviction was based on two incentivized witnesses. So there was two witnesses there. One was a guy that was already in prison for aggravated robbery. He had said that Marcellus had confessed to him in prison. But it is actually found out that there was a reward and a deal to be made with this situation. And we've heard of this before. So that was one of them. And the other witness was Marcellus' ex-girlfriend, who had already been known to lie under oath.
Oh my God.
Okay, so they're the only two pieces of evidence, witness statements. They were inconsistent with the crime scene. They were inconsistent with each other. Okay? So these should have been thrown out of court straight away. Because
it shouldn't have even got to court.
It shouldn't have got to court. And we've done, if you've listened to our witness episode, how two people can actually see the same thing, and it could not be intentional that they've sort of misled the police. In this case, it sounds like it was intentional. So no evidence linking him to the crime scene at all. DNA evidence was collected from the crime scene, and in 2016, so 16 years after he's been sentenced and he's in prison on death row, the DNA was tested and it excluded him. This DNA evidence was found on the murder weapon.
So was he only arrested in the first place because of those two witness
statements?
Right, okay. So he wouldn't have even been...
And when the DNA evidence excluded him, then his legal team and whoever else were fighting to get the evidence renewed in court, and no court would review this new evidence that had come through, which I thought is a bit strange in the first place, that no one would. Police also found hairs next to the body. A footprint in blood outside the crime scene. Which was also not a match. None of those two. So whoever left the footprint in blood was someone who was there at the time of the offence and at the time, or directly after. So I'm guessing they excluded a partner, a husband, and they also excluded our suspect here. So the hairs didn't match.
So no hair, no DNA.
No, nothing.
No fingerprint, nothing. Just absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing at all. So in 2017, Marcellus was actually scheduled for execution. And
what's Marcellus said about this? Like in trial or anything? Did he...
Obviously, he's denied it all the way through. He's always denied having any knowledge
of
this. So 2017, his scheduled execution was about to take place, and the governor stepped in to postpone the date.
Right.
So this is only a year after the DNA evidence has come to light.
Okay.
So this gave his legal team more time to try and push this through court to get him to review the evidence.
Yeah.
But the judge ruled that there is no evidence that he is innocent, despite DNA evidence, and the judge actually kept the execution day set for September the 24th. So this was in August. So in August, they were still pushing for the date to be either pushed back so they could do more work on it. Yeah. But you imagine since 2017, the last time, imagine how much work they've had to do on it already.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
They'll have been pushing and pushing and pushing. This date's getting closer and closer and closer. And this is one of the people who the Innocence Project is helping. And like I said, his execution date is scheduled for the 24th, which is next week.
Yeah, and I just don't understand how the judge couldn't possibly say, like, we're just not gonna...
How has it not been to court? How is it not being reviewed? Like, how in general, with no evidence at all? Even though they have openly said the witnesses were incentivised. So this obviously, quite rightly, is all over the American news at the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm now following this case thinking,
absolutely.
Oh my God, like, is an innocent man here going to get killed? And obviously I didn't see the trial. I didn't see, everything that went on in court.
Yeah.
But from the evidence alone does not put Marcellus at the crime scene.
No.
And I found this quite distressing.
It's harrowing
and upsetting because we are in 2024.
Yeah.
If you are not 100% that someone has committed such a horrific crime, and this crime in this case, it was horrific.
Yes.
40 something times you've stabbed a woman is absolutely awful. But if you've not got evidence that 100% someone has done that, I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't sleep at night being that judge sentencing someone to death.
No, and also you're not giving that victim justice.
You're not.
If this is the case.
Because the killer's still out there.
Yeah, and if Marcellus is, which it sounds, completely innocent, then actually the family and the victim have no justice whatsoever.
No.
Because what it has become is a political decision based off, probably hiding mistakes within the case in the first place.
Yeah, covering something up.
And now one person who has already been brutally murdered isn't going to get justice, and you're going to sentence an innocent person to death.
So Marcellus really, even if he does get off death row, if he does get out of prison, he's lost his life anyway.
Absolutely.
He's lost the majority of his life. He's lost, his family growing up. I'm sure people will have died while he's been in prison.
And you would just have no trust whatsoever in anyone. Again, I don't think, would you?
Certainly not. So I just wanted to bring sort of that to light, seeing as though it is so prevalent in the news at the moment, and it is scheduled execution for next week.
Horrendous.
So I will keep following the case and I will update you on that. So we've just whizzed through a bit of that just to sort of give you an overview, but I will put some links in if you want to look a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So I am unfortunately going to talk about a very similar case in terms of a lack of evidence and someone being on death row. But before I do that, we will slightly lighten the tone. I say that in a way in which...
It is sort of.
So basically, I looked at last words from people on death row. And obviously, some of them are like ludicrous. Some of them, they just don't say anything. Some you can tell that they're just saying something to piss people off.
Yeah.
But these were a couple that I picked out. So this first one is actually funny, but he intended it to be. So I feel like we're allowed to laugh.
We're all right to laugh at this.
It was a criminal called George Affel. Okay. Appel. Affel. And when they said, do you have any final statements? He said, well, gentlemen, you're about to see a baked affle. And that did tickle me.
Do you think people laughed at that when he said it? Because if someone come out with that, you'd be so shocked because they're like just about to die, but then you wouldn't want to laugh because you'd be like, oh God, like
no, because
I think I would laugh at that.
Yeah, and it'd be one of those where you can't look at whoever's...
And it's inappropriate to laugh.
Yeah, and you can't look at whoever's next to you. And then just some others. We've got Hooray for Anarchy. This is the happiest moment of my life. Yeah.
Right, okay.
We have got, yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back. A lot of film references there in that one. That's nice.
Yeah, I'd be like, are you done?
Yeah.
Quiet now. We said the last few words, the last sentence, not the last paragraph.
And then the last one, which I do think must be difficult for the victims' families to hear, was, I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me, and the rest of the world can kiss my ass. Imagine being that bitter in your last
breath.
Yeah. Anyway, so there you go. There's some last statements. There are many, many more of those.
Yeah.
But my stomach's rumbling horrifically.
That is so loud.
Sorry.
I don't know if the microphone will pick that up, but Beth is absolutely starving here. Get these girls some food. We should bring snacks.
Yeah.
We'll be rustling with all the snacks.
Well, we can, but I can't mid-snack.
Yeah, I suppose.
So my case is that of Rocky Myers. So a convicted murderer named Rocky Myers, who is one of 175 prisoners currently on death row in Alabama.
Okay.
Again, I'll try and whiz through this. So Rocky's one of 10 children, grew up in New Jersey. His father was an alcoholic, and his mother had actually given birth to her first child at 14, so she became quite clinically depressed quite quickly. So he had quite a tough childhood, but Rocky was said to be kind, and people just misunderstood him. He was diagnosed with a learning disability whilst he was at school, and he couldn't read past grade 3 of school, which is a really early level, and couldn't tell the time way into adulthood. So again, still can't really read, and does have this, disability. So he went on to get married and had 4 children. His family say that he's a loving dad and he's always done his best. He's had struggles with drug addiction as well, but they said he never abandoned them. They all lived together, and that really never had a bearing on their
So he stuck it
upbringing.
out.
Yeah. So the crime that took place was actually pretty much opposite his own home, where he lived with his wife and 4 children. And the victim in this case is a woman called Ludie Mae.
Okay.
So Ludie Mae lived in the house just across from Rocky, and they had an awareness of each other. They kind of knew each other because Rocky wasn't employed at the time, but he just used to do odd jobs for people around the area. The area itself, really rough. So it was known to locals as being Crack City, they called it. So pretty rough area. So on the 4th of October in 1991, Ludie Mae Tucker was at home, and she'd actually got her cousin around. So Marie Dutton was in her house, and they were both in separate bedrooms, and they were both asleep. At around midnight, both of them wake up because they hear someone knocking on the door. And most of this account comes from Marie, Ludie Mae's cousin. So she basically said, they both thought, who was this? But she thought, well, there's no reason for me to get up because she could hear Ludie talking. Yeah. So she looks out of the little blind and she sees that Ludie Mae is talking to a male who's on the porch, and Ludie Mae hasn't opened the door or anything, but she's talking to someone through the blind. She can kind of hear what Ludie Mae is saying. So she says that this person was basically saying that they'd been in a car accident and that they needed to use Ludie Mae's phone. But the one thing that she picked up on, which was odd, is that She then heard the intruder enter the property, at which point Ludi May said, "My husband is just in the room next door."
Right.
Now, Marie said this was really weird because Ludi May was single. She didn't have a husband.
Yeah, she's
So
saying
why
that I'd do that though.
Yeah.
Say it so they know you're not alone, there's another man in the house.
Yeah, exactly. So it's for safety, isn't it? So she said she thought it was strange, but kind of didn't think anything of it. But then, unfortunately, the next thing that she heard was her cousin scream, Ludi May screaming. And she was then frozen with fear, remained in the bedroom, but the attacker then came into the bedroom and also stabbed her. So now Ludi May and her have both been stabbed. The attacker has then fled. And again, Marie was, in a state of shock, distress. Yeah. She's been stabbed. And so she just stated that the offender, from all she saw in that, because again, it would have been completely fleeting, was that they were wearing a light coloured shirt.
Okay.
She then sees that her cousin is on the sofa, and her cousin had actually managed to ring 911, but she'd also been stabbed 4 times. Ludi May spoke to officers at the scene before she was taken, or before they were both taken away, and Ludi May said that it was a man who was short and stocky, a black male, wearing a light coloured shirt that looked like it had blood on it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Ludi May passed away, and so officers were then looking for an offender for murder and for the attempted murder. Yeah. So they actually find forensic evidence. They found fingerprints, they found a partial palm print, and they noticed that this VCR player had been stolen from the house. So they had got forensic evidence, okay? So you'd think that, we start with that.
Yeah.
But no. Member of the public comes forward with said VCR player that had been stolen, and this was a guy called Butch. Butch basically said, I got this from my sister's house and she runs a shot house. A shot house is basically like an illegal... Den. Yeah, but also they would sell booze. So it was like it was a bit of a local community area. There was lots of people loitering. But then the local drug dealer would deal from the porch.
Yeah.
Again, they kind of the police already knew about this, but just didn't want to do anything, because then if they did need information about any cases, they would go to these guys and say, give us what we need. So Butch then comes into the police station with his friend Roadrunner, and they both give a statement that says that it was a regular customer that had come in and traded the VCR player for drugs, right?
Yep.
This person was called Anthony Coolbreeze. And they said that he was sweaty and paranoid and that he'd done this trade. So they're now looking for this guy called Coolbreeze. He's the drug dealer, but he's got quite a nice family. People had said, again, they'd got other tips to say that they'd seen Coolbreeze running through this alley near Ludi May's house, wearing a light coloured shirt stained with blood. So he was then arrested, and an award for more information was given. At this point, someone came forward who was a friend of Coolbreeze and Coolbreeze's nice family, and he said it wasn't Coolbreeze, it was someone else. I saw them outside Ludi May's house with the VCR player, and at this stage they were like, right, hang on a minute then, because who is it? If it's not Coolbreeze, then who is it? So they bring back in Butch and Roadrunner, and they say, yes, sorry, that was a lie. That first statement was a lie. We were mad at Coolbreeze, so we just said it was him. Everything else is still the same, but it wasn't Coolbreeze.
Yeah.
So then they're like, right, okay, well then who is it? So they then said that in actual fact, it was a man called Rocky Myers. So I've just spoken about Rocky. Rocky lived in the local area.
Across the road.
The road. And so they then question Rocky. So Rocky was on probation at the time for unrelated drug offences, but he'd never been involved in any violent crimes or anything. He was then interrogated, But funnily enough, there was no evidence of this interrogation. So there was no recording of it. There was no note taking, nothing.
Right.
And they just
what year
said,
is this?
It was 1990.
In the 1990s.
Yeah.
So, okay, they should still have...
Yeah. So he'd been charged and put in prison, and then interrogators had gone in, basically detectives had gone in and interrogated him.
Yeah.
So he admitted to having been on crack, but said he didn't know anything about Ludi May and that he'd never met Butch or Roadrunner, but that he did know this person that had come forward for the reward money, Marzell. And so then when they said, well, hang on a minute, if you know Marzell, surely you know the other people, Rocky then said, okay, yeah, you're right, I do know Butch, and that I did trade the VCR player, but Rocky said I just found it in a nearby bush in this alleyway. So based on just that, they charged him with the murder.
Right.
So again, like your case, you've just got witness statements from someone that already doesn't want Cool Breeze to be in trouble because he's friends with the family.
And they've already lied in this first statement as well, so it makes them unreliable witnesses.
Yeah, you've already got Cool Breeze, you've already got Butch and Roadrunner, who are known for telling the police what they want to get out of crimes themselves.
Yeah.
And he's then convicted of the murder. So he's convicted. 2 years later, it goes to trial. And there was just issues from the get-go in the story. Again, like you say, multiple witnesses had seen him at the shot house. They'd seen Rocky, but they all said he was wearing dark clothing.
Right.
So that didn't line up.
Inconsistent as well.
Yeah. Again, Cool Breeze had been seen multiple times that night too, but he was wearing a white shirt. And it did look like it was stained in blood to people that were there. And also, this alleyway that Rocky said that he'd found the VCR player was what is known as like a stash house.
Yeah.
So people would either put drugs there or stolen items there.
That they were then going to trade.
Yeah, so it isn't beyond the realms of possibility that Rocky had found it. Also, Rocky had really bad eczema. So although nothing matched him, none of those fingerprints came back to being his, the partial palm print, and there was no DNA of him at the scene, despite the fact that if he'd have been in this violent struggle,
there would have
he'd
been
have left
some
skin
form,
cells. Yeah. So again, just the same as your case, absolutely no real evidence to suggest that he was there.
Yeah.
And Rocky admitted that he bought the drugs from Butch and then went home, and so he'd got an alibi. He was convicted despite the lack of evidence, and there was an appeal 2 years later, and Marie Dutton actually came forward with the information about the husband, and she said Rocky knew my cousin Ludi May, so if it was Rocky, Ludi May wouldn't have said
I've got a husband because he knows you haven't.
Because he knows you haven't.
Yeah,
so then they've got even more evidence to suggest. So he is now on death row for a crime that there's no forensic evidence to suggest that he did commit. Again, 11 of the 12 jurors were white, and a couple of them had already been known to have dressed in blackface or make racial slurs. And so potentially...
So it's already what they knew what they were going to say despite the evidence, didn't they, when they got to court?
Yeah. But unfortunately, and again, you can do research on this, there's just been so many fuck-ups in this case in terms of Rocky's appeals. So Rocky's missed a couple of appeals because the people that were working on his case have stopped working on it and they haven't informed him. So he's then missed deadlines, but he's had no awareness. Also, he can't read, so he's been sent letters.
He's got to have someone to read them out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is he on death row now
then? Yeah, so he's on death row. In 2023, there was a petition for post-conviction appeal.
Yeah.
But again, he missed the deadline for that because this guy basically just got a better job and ditched
left.
Rocky's case.
I wonder if he's under the Innocence Project now, because I know
would
that
think
they
so.
do a lot of the research into the case for you.
Yeah.
And they are quite good with things like that.
Yeah. And then the guy that wanted the reward money, Marzell, he has since come forward and said that he'd actually been arrested for stealing a car at the time.
Yeah.
And told officers that he's been convicted of stealing a car post this happening.
Yeah.
And detectives told him that he could get off on the crime if he lied about it and said that it was Rocky that had been seen stealing the VCR.
Right, yeah.
That's also been backed up via a police report, because the people that are now the lawyers on Rocky's case now have looked and they've said, yeah, you know, he was arrested for stealing this car.
Yeah,
so it does back up his story. Yeah. But again, the federal judge didn't think that was enough for a review of the case.
Again, same as mine.
Yeah.
Has he got a scheduled date yet, or is he still waiting?
Yeah, so the only way now that he could potentially be saved from death row is if this Governor Kay Ivey grants a stay of clemency.
Yeah.
So there is a petition which will add for her to grant this stay of clemency, basically.
Yeah.
But again, just based on no evidence whatsoever.
No evidence
and
at all.
Witnesses that you can't trust.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
Absolute madness. So those are our 2 case studies that we've whizzed through for you.
Yeah. So yeah, do your own research, have a look into it. Hopefully you found it interesting. And if nothing else, comment what your last death row meal would be. I hate that question. Depends what mood I'm in. And I probably won't be hungry.
Know what mine would be, because
and I wouldn't be hungry.
It depends what time of the day as well. You're having breakfast, dinner or tea.
Yeah. But it's other offenders that make the death row meals. Madness. So there you go.
Death row case
A
wrapped
whistle
up.
stop tour. Let us know if you like this kind of episode where we just discuss not necessarily evidence.
Yeah, because then we can just add these in every so often in between case studies to just lighten it up. Well, say lighten it up, we're talking about death row, but like case studies are quite hard hitting,
Intense.
aren't they, and intense.
Yeah.
So if you do like this, we could do more of these for you. So let us know in the comments what you like. Make sure you follow us on our socials, and let's try get the next stop 40k views.
Oh yeah.
So we will see you next week. Bye.
Take care.